My name is Clara Meadows, and for the first 18 years of my life, I believed my purpose was to be the quiet shoreline to my family's turbulent sea. I was born and raised in Port Blossom, a town that clung to the rocky coast of Maine like a stubborn barnacle. It was a place of deep, anchoring beauty, of salt-laced winds that swept through the pines and fog that rolled in from the Atlantic, softening the world into a watercolor painting. My childhood memories are saturated with these sensations: the scent of low tide, the cry of gulls, the cool, damp feel of a pebble worn smooth by the ocean. Our family was a fixture in Port Blossom, much like the old lighthouse on the point. My father, Richard, and my mother, Helen, owned Vance and Company Fine Art, a gallery and custom framing shop that occupied a handsome brick building on Main Street. It wasn't just a business, it was the repository of their identity. They curated not just art, but an image of sophisticated, coastal success. My father was the stoic businessman, his approval as rare and valuable as the signed prints he sometimes acquired. My mother was the social architect, a woman who moved through the town's upper echelon with a practiced grace, her smile a carefully constructed piece of art in itself. And then there was Isabel, my sister, 2 years my junior. Izzy was the masterpiece of their collection. She was vibrant and talented, a budding artist whose charcoal sketches and moody seascapes were already winning local awards. She was the sun, and I, by silent, mutual agreement, was the planet that dutifully orbited her, providing the gravitational pull of responsibility that allowed her to shine without consequence. I was the one who remembered her project deadlines, who made sure her art supplies were stocked, who drove her to and from her lessons. I was the steady, reliable background of her brilliant life. I didn't resent it, not then. I loved my sister, and I thought this was what love was, a quiet, ceaseless act of accommodation. I found my own solace not in a gallery, but in the skeletal frames of old, weathered barns and the elegant, load-bearing arches of the town's stone bridge. I was fascinated by structure, by how things held together against the forces of gravity and time. While Izzy captured the fleeting beauty of a sunset, I would sketch the immutable lines of a roof truss or the sturdy joinery of a post and beam. It was a quiet passion, one I kept mostly to myself. It didn't fit the family portrait. My car was a 1993 Volvo station wagon, seafoam green, with over 200,000 miles on it. I called her the Walrus. She was built like a tank but was showing her age. I loved her cavernous interior and the gentle, rumbling groan she made when she started on a cold morning. I'd begged my father for months to get new tires. The current set was worn smooth, the treads as faint as a ghost's whisper. "They'll last another season, Clara," he'd said, waving a dismissive hand, his focus already back on a new collection of maritime paintings. "Don't be so dramatic." That was my role. The practical, overly cautious one, the girl whose concerns were easily dismissed as melodrama. So, I learned to drive with extra care, to feel the road through the worn steering wheel, to anticipate the car's every slip and slide. I became a better driver because of his neglect, a small, ironic grace I didn't appreciate until much later. The night it happened, the sky had been weeping for hours. Not a gentle mist, but a furious, driving rain that turned the roads into black mirrors and blurred the edges of the world. It was the night of the annual Rising Tides Youth Art Gala, the most prestigious event of its kind in the county. Isabel had a large triptych entered, a dramatic rendering of a storm-tossed sea that everyone, especially my mother, was certain would win the grand prize. The entire day had been a whirlwind of preparation, centered around Izzy. My mother had spent the afternoon helping her select the perfect dress, a deep sapphire velvet that made her look older and impossibly chic. My father had meticulously framed her triptych in reclaimed driftwood, a signature Vance and Company touch. My job, as always, was logistics. I was to drive Izzy to the event hall on the other side of town, ensure her artwork was delivered pristine, and then circle back to pick up my mother's dress from the dry cleaner before returning home. "Clara, for heaven's sake, don't be late," my mother had instructed, her voice tight with anxiety as she adjusted a stray curl on Isabel's head. "They're very strict about the check-in time for the artists. It would be mortifying if she missed it." I won't be, Mom, I promised, my own stomach a knot of sympathetic nerves. And drive carefully, my father added, his eyes on Izzy's artwork, which was carefully wrapped in canvas and bubble wrap in the back of the walrus. That piece is irreplaceable. They never said, you are irreplaceable. I didn't expect them to. The rain was relentless. The Volvo's wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge, smearing the water across the windshield in hypnotic, disorienting arcs. Isabel sat beside me, humming to herself, scrolling through her phone. She was insulated from the storm by her own excitement, by the impermeable bubble of being the center of the universe. Can you turn the heat up? It's freezing, she said, not looking up from her screen. I reached for the dial, my knuckles brushing the cracked dashboard. The tires are really slick, Iz. I have to go slow. Just don't make me late, she sighed, a familiar refrain. We were on the old coastal highway, a winding two-lane road that hugged the cliffside. The ocean roared below us, a churning, invisible beast in the darkness. I could feel the car hydroplaning, a sickening, weightless sensation as the worn tires lost their grip on the pavement. I eased my foot off the accelerator, my hands clenching the wheel. It happened in the space between one breath and the next. A deer, a shadow made solid, leaped into the road, its eyes wide and luminous in the glare of my headlights. I swerved instinctively. It was the wrong move. The walrus, already unstable, spun into a terrifying pirouette. I remember the high, thin sound of Isabel's gasp, the metallic screech of tires that found no purchase, and the sickening lurch as we left the road. There was no dramatic flip. Just a brutal, jarring slide down the muddy embankment, ending with a bone-shattering crunch as the driver's side slammed into a massive, unyielding pine tree. The world went white with the starburst of the deploying airbag, then dark. The last sound I heard before the silence was the tinkle of the passenger window shattering, like a chandelier falling in a distant room. My first conscious thought was of the scent of pine needles and damp earth, mingling with the acrid smell of the airbag. A sharp, searing pain shot up from my left leg, and my right wrist throbbed with a deep, pulsing ache. I tried to move, but my leg was pinned by the crumpled dashboard. My head was pressed against the driver's side window, and I could feel something warm and sticky trickling down my temple. Izzy? I rasped, my voice a dry whisper. Are you okay? From the passenger seat, I heard a sob. My dress. There's glass all over my dress. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my vision. Through the spiderweb cracks in the windshield, I saw a familiar pair of headlights sweep across the road above and pull over. My parents' SUV. A wave of profound, desperate relief washed over me. They were here. We were safe. My mother was out of the car in a flash, a frantic silhouette against the rain. She scrambled down the muddy slope, her phone held up like a beacon. But she didn't run to my side. She ran to Isabel's. She wrenched the passenger door open. Isabel. Oh my God, are you hurt? She cried, her voice shrill with panic. My dress is ruined, Mom, Izzy wailed, holding up the velvet skirt, now dotted with glittering shards of glass. And my face. I think I'm bleeding. My father appeared beside her, his powerful flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He played it over the side of the car, over Isabel's face, and then, with a curse, into the back seat. The triptych, he said, his voice flat with dread. Is the art okay? They hadn't looked at me. Not once. I was less than 10 feet away, trapped and bleeding, and they hadn't even looked at me. Dad, I whispered, the word catching in my throat. Dad, my leg. I think it's broken. I can't move it. My mother finally turned her head, her face a mask of furious impatience. Clara, honestly. Look at this mess you've made. Isabel could have been seriously hurt. Richard, the gala, she said, turning back to my father. She can't miss it. What are we going to do? My father's jaw was tight. He moved around to the back of the Volvo and pried the hatch open. He carefully, reverently, lifted out the bubble-wrapped canvas. One corner of the frame was splintered. He swore again, a low, vicious sound. We have to go, he said decisively. We'll take Izzy. We can still make it if we hurry. What about Clara? Isabel asked, her voice small. For a fleeting second, I felt a spark of hope. "She'll have to call a tow truck," my father said, not looking at me. He was already herding Isabel toward the SUV, shielding her from the rain with his own body. "She got herself into this mess. She can get herself out of it." The words didn't feel real. They were like something from a nightmare, distorted and cruel. I watched as my mother settled Isabel into their car, fussing over her, brushing the non-existent dust from her shoulders. "Mom, please," I begged, my voice cracking with pain and disbelief. "Don't leave me. Please, I'm hurt." My mother paused at the door of the SUV. She looked back at me, her expression not of concern, but of pure, unadulterated annoyance. "We don't have time for this, Clara. The registration for the gala closes in 20 minutes, and they charge a $100 late fee. We can't afford to throw that money away." And then they were gone. The red taillights of their SUV bled into the rain and vanished, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my car in the roaring dark. The silence they left behind was more violent than the crash itself. It was the sound of my own worthlessness. In that moment, I understood with a chilling, gut-wrenching clarity that I was not a part of their curated collection. I was just the frame, and I had broken. Time lost its shape. The rain kept falling, a cold, indifferent percussion on the bent metal roof. Shivering, I managed to fish my phone from the floor mat with my good hand. The screen was cracked, but it lit up. One bar of service. My fingers, clumsy with cold and shock, dialed 911. The voice of the dispatcher was a lifeline in the darkness, calm and professional. She kept me talking, asking me questions I could barely answer, her voice a steady anchor as waves of pain and nausea washed over me. It felt like an eternity before I saw the flashing red and blue lights painting the trees. The emergency room was a world of sterile white and beeping machines. They cut my favorite flannel shirt off me, cataloged my injuries with detached efficiency, a compound fracture of the tibia, a shattered scaphoid bone in my right wrist, 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion. A kind, tired-looking doctor with gentle eyes explained that my wrist would require surgery, pins, and a plate to hold the delicate bones together. My leg would be in a cast for months. As they wheeled me to a room after setting my leg, a nurse asked for my parents' contact information. I gave it to her, a hollow, automatic response. And then I waited. I watched the clock on the wall, each tick a small hammer blow against the silence. Hours passed. The night bled into a gray, misty dawn. No one came. No one called. They finally appeared late the next afternoon. My mother walked in first, holding a large latte from the Daily Grind, the trendy coffee shop in town. She didn't look at my cast or the 4 in my arm. She looked at the paperwork a nurse had left on the bedside table. "Well," she said, taking a delicate sip of her coffee. "I hope you're prepared to pay for this, Clara. You know we're not made of money. The gallery's profits have been tight this quarter." My father stood by the door, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression grim. "Maybe this will teach you to pay more attention to the road," he said. It wasn't a statement of concern. It was a verdict. I stared at them, a strange, cold calm settling over me. "Where's Izzy?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Oh, she won," my mother said, a real smile finally gracing her lips. "Second place, actually, but the judges said her work showed immense maturity. She was the talk of the gala." She posted a picture on her Instagram. "You should see it." I had seen it. During a sleepless hour in the dead of night, I had scrolled through my phone. There was Isabel, beaming, holding a large ceremonial check, standing beside her slightly damaged triptych. The caption read, "A bit of drama on the way here. T-checks for the bumpy ride, sis. But so honored to win second place. Hashtag rising tides, hashtag artist life, hashtag worth it." The comments were a flurry of congratulations. A few people had asked if I was okay. Izzy had replied to one, "Yeah, she's fine, just clumsy lol." Clumsy. Not trapped. Not terrified. Not abandoned. Clumsy. That was the moment the shoreline of my old self eroded completely, washed away by a tide of truth so powerful it left nothing behind but bedrock. I wasn't their daughter in the way I'd always thought. I was a utility. A function. And when I had ceased to be useful, I had become an inconvenience, a bill to be paid, a mess to be cleaned up by someone else. My recovery was a slow, solitary journey. I spent a week in the hospital, my wrist rebuilt with titanium, my leg encased in heavy plaster. When I was discharged, my parents made it clear that caring for me at home would be a disruption. They arranged for me to stay at the Port Blossom Convalescent Home, a place that smelled of antiseptic and boiled cabbage, mostly populated by residents 50 years my senior. They dropped me off with a suitcase and a promise to visit when they had a chance. Those weeks were a crucible. I learned to navigate the world on crutches, to dress myself with one functional hand, to endure the long, quiet hours with nothing but my own thoughts for company. The physical pain was immense, but it was nothing compared to the ache of my new reality. My family didn't visit. Izzy sent one text, "Hope you are feeling better. Mom needs you to call the insurance company about the car." It was during one of those calls, while on hold with the insurance agent, that the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I had to call from the nurse's station, and I overheard my father's voice on the phone with the same agency a few days prior, his voice carrying down the hall. I hadn't understood it then, but now the agent on my call clarified. "Yes, Ms. Meadows, we have the police report," the cheerful agent said. "And we've received the claim from your father. Once we confirm the vehicle is a total loss, the check for the policy's full value, minus your deductible, will be mailed out to him." He mentioned it was a real relief, said it would help cover the gallery's overhead for the next quarter. My breath caught in my chest. They weren't just indifferent to my suffering, they were cashing in on it. The Walrus, my beloved wrecked car, was a windfall. My accident, my broken bones and terror, had become a solution to their quarterly cash flow problem. Lying in that sterile bed, I made a decision. It wasn't a fiery vow of revenge. It was quieter, colder, and far more resolute. It was the decision to build something for myself. A structure they couldn't inhabit, couldn't damage, couldn't even comprehend. I would not be a shoreline for them to erode anymore. I would become my own bedrock. I finished my high school credits from the convalescent home. I applied to colleges far from the sea. When I was finally mobile, limping but independent, I moved back into my room at home. It was a ghost of a room. They had already started using it for gallery storage, canvases leaning against my walls. I said nothing. I worked 2 jobs, brewing coffee at the Daily Grind at dawn and shelving books at the town library in the evenings. I was a quiet, polite shadow in their house. I saved every single dollar. My mentor during that time was Mrs. Gable, the town librarian. She was a kind, sharp-eyed woman who saw more than I thought. She never asked about my family or the limp I still carried, but she always had a book set aside for me, books on structural engineering, on urban planning, and biographies of pioneering female architects. She saw the sketches I made on scrap paper and encouraged me. "You have a good eye for lines, Clara," she'd said once. "You see the bones of things." The day I left Port Blossom, I left a simple note on the kitchen counter. "I've gone to school. I'll be in touch." I took one last look at the house, at the life I was leaving behind, and felt not sadness, but the clean, quiet relief of a foundation being poured on solid ground. The next 8 years were a blur of focused, relentless work. I chose a university in the Midwest, a place of vast plains and solid earth, as far from the capricious ocean as I could get. I threw myself into the architecture program. It was everything I had craved: logic, beauty, and strength, all intertwined. I learned how stress and strain worked, how to design structures that could withstand immense pressure, how to create spaces that were not just beautiful, but safe. I was a good student, but a quiet one. I made friends, but I kept a careful distance. The wound of my family's betrayal was a private, tender thing. I went to therapy, where I slowly learned to name what had happened to me. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was neglect. It was abandonment. My therapist gave me a new vocabulary, words like boundaries and self-worth. They were foreign materials at first, but I slowly began to build with them. I graduated at the top of my class and took a job with a prestigious firm in Chicago. I specialized in historical renovation and adaptive reuse, taking old, forgotten buildings and giving them new purpose. I loved the work. It felt like a metaphor for my own life, honoring the past without being trapped by it, finding new strength in old bones. I was good at it. I saved my money, invested wisely, and built a life for myself that was sturdy, elegant, and entirely my own. I rarely spoke to my family. There were occasional, stilted phone calls on holidays, my mother's voice tinged with a faint, questioning disapproval of my life, so far from her orbit. Isabel had become a moderately successful artist, her work sold exclusively through Vance and Company, her life still deeply intertwined with our parents. They never asked about my work, my friends, my happiness. The conversations were superficial, circling the familiar topics of Port Blossom gossip and the gallery's latest triumphs. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. It was from a commercial real estate agent in Maine. He was representing the owner of the historic Mariners Trust building on Main Street in Port Blossom, the very building that housed Vance and Company. Fine art. The owner was retiring and wanted to sell. He was quietly reaching out to a select list of architects who specialized in historic properties before putting it on the open market. He had gotten my name from a former professor. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the pictures of the handsome brick facade, the large glass windows where my father's curated art had looked out onto the world for decades. I saw the discreet plaque by the door, Vance and Company. Fine art. EST 1995. They didn't own the building. They were merely its most long-standing tenants. A fact my mother conveniently omitted at her garden club meetings. For a week, I did nothing. I thought about the fury, the desire for a grand, cinematic moment of retribution. But the architect in me, the part that valued planning and precision, took over. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about taking the very space that represented their suffocating, conditional love and transforming it into something that embodied my own values, community, safety, and genuine creativity. I formed a small LLC, secured financing, and, through a lawyer, made an offer. It was all done quietly, professionally, under my corporate name. The owner, a man who valued his building's integrity, was impressed by my portfolio of sensitive renovations. He accepted my offer. The closing was handled remotely. Just like that, I owned the foundation upon which my family had built their entire world. They knew nothing about it. Their lease, I discovered, was up for renewal in 6 months. Coincidentally, they were in the midst of planning the gallery's 25th anniversary gala, the biggest event in their history. My mother's letters, the only form of communication she now preferred, as if writing an announcement for the local paper, were full of breathless details about caterers, guest lists, and a planned retrospective of Isabel's work. I waited. I drew up my own plans, not for a gallery, but for something new. I waited until 2 months before the gala, when their plans were solidified, their deposits paid, their expectations soaring. Then I flew home to Port Blossom for the first time in 8 years. The town looked smaller, the sea less menacing. I checked into a small inn on the harbor and spent a day just walking, breathing in the familiar salty air. It no longer felt like a place of ghosts. It just felt like a place. The next morning, I walked into Vance and Company. Fine art. The little bell over the door chimed, the same sound that had punctuated my childhood. My father was behind the counter, examining a frame through his bifocals. He looked up, and a flicker of confusion crossed his face before it settled into recognition. "Clara," he said, his voice neutral. "What are you doing here? We didn't expect you." "I'm in town on business," I said, my voice even. My heart was beating a steady, calm rhythm. "I have a meeting." My mother emerged from the back office, a stack of invitations in her hand. Her face registered the same surprise, followed by a cool assessment. "Clara, you should have called. We're incredibly busy with the gala preparations." "I know. That's actually what I need to talk to you about," I said. I placed a thick manila envelope on the counter. My lawyer sent a registered letter, but I wanted to deliver a copy in person. My father eyed the envelope with suspicion. "What is this?" "It's a notification of non-renewal of your lease," I said, keeping my tone professional, as if discussing a project with a client. And these, I added, unrolling a set of blueprints on the counter next to a stack of Izzy's latest prints, are the preliminary plans for my renovation of the building. Silence. A thick, profound silence that felt heavier than the one in my wrecked car all those years ago. My father stared at the blueprints, then at me. My mother's perfectly composed face began to crumble. Your renovation? She stammered. What are you talking about? This is our gallery. This is your gallery, I corrected gently. It's my building. I purchased it 2 months ago. The color drained from my mother's face. My father snatched the letter and tore it open, his eyes scanning the legal jargon. I saw the moment he understood. His face, usually a mask of stoic control, contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You can't do this, he snarled, his voice low. This is our life's work. This is Isabel's entire career. Right on cue, Izzy swept in from the street, holding a coffee. You will not believe what the caterer just said, she began, then stopped short, seeing me. Clara? What's going on? Why does Mom look like she's seen a ghost? She's evicting us, my mother whispered, the words sounding foreign and ugly in the pristine space. Your sister. She bought the building and she's throwing us out. Isabel's face went through a rapid series of emotions, confusion, hurt, and then a familiar, sharp-edged anger. You're kicking us out? 2 months before the anniversary gala? Why would you do that to us? To me, this was the moment. The climax I had both dreaded and prepared for. But I felt no fire, no triumphant rage. Only a deep, quiet sorrow for the 4 people standing in this room who had never learned how to be a family. I looked at each of them, meeting their eyes. I learned about foundations from all of you, I said, my voice soft but clear. I learned that some are built on things that look solid, like reputation and success, but they can't withstand a single shock. I learned that you have to build your own on something stronger. I paused, and the memory of that night, so long buried, rose to the surface, not as a weapon, but as a truth. The night of the crash, I said, and I saw them all flinch. You left me in a wrecked car, bleeding and trapped, because you were worried about a late fee and a piece of art. You taught me my value in your world that night. You taught me I wasn't part of the collection. I was just the disposable frame. So I went away and I learned how to build. And this, I gestured around the gallery, at the walls that had held their ambitions for so long, is my first project back home. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cry. I had spoken the truth, and it hung in the air between us, undeniable and absolute. My father sputtered, my mother began to weep quietly, and Isabel just stared at me, her own eyes filling with tears of anger and incomprehension. You've ruined everything, she finally choked out. I shook my head slowly. No, Izzy. I'm just building something new. I rolled up my blueprints, tucked them under my arm, and walked out of the gallery. The bell chimed softly behind me, a sound of finality, of a door closing on a life I had long since left behind. The aftermath was exactly what I expected. The story that my family spun in Port Blossom was of a cruel, vengeful daughter, mentally unstable from a long-ago accident, who had returned to destroy her loving family out of spite. They painted me as a monster. But I didn't fight them. I didn't post receipts or expose their lies. I simply began my work. I hired a local crew, and we started the careful deconstruction of the gallery's interior. I was there every day, in my work boots and hard hat, overseeing every detail. The town watched, curious. My project wasn't a secret. The sign I hung out front described it clearly, the Cornerstone Project. A mixed-use community arts hub, featuring affordable studios for local artists, workshop space for public classes, and a ground-floor gallery dedicated to showcasing emerging New England talent. I was not destroying an institution, I was creating a new one with its doors open to everyone. Slowly, the town's narrative began to shift. Mrs. Gable, now retired but still a formidable voice in the community, would tell anyone who listened about the quiet, determined girl who sketched building plans in the library. The construction crew spoke of the fair, demanding, but brilliant architect who was bringing an old building back to life. My actions spoke louder than my family's words. 6 months later, on the night that would have been the Vance and Company 25th anniversary gala, the Cornerstone project had its grand opening. The space was transformed. The ground floor was a bright, airy gallery filled with the vibrant, diverse work of artists who had never had a place to show before. The walls were warm, exposed brick, the floors polished maple. It was beautiful, welcoming, and alive. The whole town, it seemed, had turned out. I didn't give a speech. I just walked through the crowd, talking to people, to the young artists whose faces glowed with pride. I saw Mrs. Gable by the window, smiling. I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. I hadn't needed an apology. I hadn't needed revenge. I had just needed to build something true. A week later, a letter arrived at my small apartment above the workshop. The handwriting was Isabel's. I opened it with steady hands. It wasn't an apology, not really. But it wasn't an accusation either. Clara, it read. The gallery is empty now. Mom cries all the time. Dad won't talk about it. I walk by your building every day. It's always full of people. I keep thinking about that night on the highway. I don't remember it the way you do. But sometimes, when I'm trying to sleep, I wonder if I should. I folded the letter and placed it on my drafting table. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't a reconciliation. It was a crack in a foundation I had long since walked away from. Whether anything new could be built upon it was no longer my concern. I looked out my window at the lights of Port Blossom twinkling against the dark expanse of the sea. For the first time in my life, I felt anchored, not to a place or a family, but to myself. I had built my own house on my own terms, and I was finally, peacefully home.